Well, good morning to you. We've got a full group of Consulting Amigos here today. With Ray being out of the country, we're glad to have you back, Ray.
Thank you.
And maybe you'll add some perspective on our discussion today, which is going to be focused on what does the Trump and Trump policies, what do his policies mean to small business in particular? So we're all small business people. We've consulted with small business, owned and operated small business. So we bring, I don't know, at least I would say 100 years of experience to the subject. And while we maybe some of us are not technically oriented, we know that John is technically oriented, and so we feel like we've got, despite our advanced ages, we have an awful lot of experience that is still extremely relevant today for small business, and seemingly wanted by some of the younger business people who are struggling with some of these things. So first topic is we have several basic subjects that we can talk about today, but let's start on a hot topic. Let's start on tariffs. In the realm of tariff, what I call them, threats. I'm not really sure what the kind of level we should throw to that yet, because we don't really have them in yet. I mean, he has said that he will do some things, and apparently, I mean, as of tomorrow, the next day, some of these are going to happen. So they have.
Well, I'd love to start off with that, Ron.
Okay.
I've got a little experience in that, or having lived through some significant tariff reductions. My home country of New Zealand had a situation back in the late 70s, 80s, when a new government came to town and they chose to remove tariffs off a significant portion of material being brought into New Zealand. It was a extremely significant shift. Automobiles had 10, 20%, 30%, some automobiles, 40% tariffs on them. Prior to this, some electronics components were in the 40% tariff area. And overnight, tariffs on a significant group of products disappeared. Now,
I'm sorry, did I miss that? Did you say they disappeared?
They disappeared.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so the unintended consequence I'm going to refer to here is whether you put tariffs on or you put tariffs off, it affects dramatically the businesses that are downstream. In the case of the electronics industry, it was exceptionally significant because New Zealand did have a number of manufacturing companies who made radios, TVs, electronic components, and they were supported in part by a very high tariff on importing product of good quality and make from overseas. So, for example, if you desire to have a Siemens or an RCA or some other make of product, you'd have to pay the price of it plus 20, 30, 40%, depending on what it was. So that gave the New Zealand manufacturing companies quite an edge on doing that, because obviously they had this built-in net profit factor that they could work on, and therefore they could produce a more costly product and compete with an artificially expensive product. Now, I bring this up because when it came off, there was a significant majority number of electronic manufacturers in New Zealand went out of business. They ceased to exist because their bottom line was affected more than 10%.
Mostly small businesses too, John.
Probably. Yeah, no, I'm talking, and we're talking about when your profitability is in the 10% area and you have a 20 or 30% impact on something coming in competing with you, it makes it untenable.
Yeah.
Now, that was the bad news. The bad news is a lot of these companies went out of business. The good news, which was the flip side of this, a couple of the companies were astute enough, agile enough, smart enough to react in such a way as they reconvened themselves. One of them was a company called Fisher and Paykel, F&P, And Fisher and Paykel is still a world force, and it probably wasn't a world force back in the day because it was making white goods. It was making, refrigerators, freezers, a lot of them, and it was the dominant player in New Zealand. And if you bought a refrigerator, it was going to be a Fisher and Paykel. It is not today. You're going to buy Samsung, you're going to buy American product and Japanese product and Korean product and Chinese product. Fisher and Paykel doesn't make white goods now. What it does now is it automates factories. And they reconfigured themselves in such a way as to produce unit volume one. Point I'm making on this is simply when you shift a broad band of industry by 10 or 15%, you're basically what you're doing is you're affecting the profitability of everything downstream by 10 or 15%. The ripple effect of that is not a ripple. It's a mini tsunami. And I would say that while I'm not against some tariffs in principle based on long-term 20-year practices, I think the threat of it has absolutely dramatic effect on our economy. It's going to freeze or decision makers for plant and equipment and material. It's going to cause an agile and fast moving up and down. It's going to be rocky.
Some people would say, yeah, but that's New Zealand and that's just a little teeny economy. And we've got a lot more players in this country, so there's more opportunity to switch back and forth. So restate that based on.
I would actually say that's relatively uninformed, because one of the benefits that small economies have is they're already semi-agile because their marketplaces are so small. They've got to be agile. So I would say that the large manufacturers in America, the largest manufacturers in America, are also based on government policy. And if you're based on government policy of union rules, or based on policy of tariffs of importing, or based on policies of environmental control, and they're all controlled by the government, what you actually have is a government-controlled manufacturing cycle. And I would argue, do the math, you look at the big three, the big two, the big four, used to be the big four, automotive guys, and then you look at heavy iron and heavy metal, and if their bottom line is not governed by government policy for 10, 20%, I'd go, I'll call myself, I'm uninformed, but
And of course, these large companies that are definitely affected by tariffs are supplied by thousands of small companies throughout the United States.
Absolutely.
And so that, if they get choked off, then these small companies are going to be the ones.
Well, have a look what happened with the
Or
semiconductor.
will it be reverse?
Problem.
Will small companies win because it's, instead of, say, small electronics being produced in China for less money, now maybe some of these smaller companies can compete if they.
Well, I think a little bit of both will happen. And I think you're right. Environmentally, part of the problem of moving the printed circuit board industry overseas and the electronics manufacturing industry overseas, part of that reason was based on environmental issues. And so, in a way, we just moved the pollution from America to Thailand, to Malaysia, to China. Did we actually help the world globally? No.
Not much.
Not much. So the better result would have been to let's clean up our manufacturing piece by piece, come up with a 10-year plan, and I think we're all in favor of clean manufacturing. And I think we can probably do clean manufacturing here better than some of the overseas countries can. So let's do it. Let's bring our manufacturing back. I'm all in favor of that. But let's also, start to clean it up, not arbitrarily and not, we're going to put a 50% impact fee on if you don't clean up by 12 months. These things don't happen in 12 months.
Yeah.
So you've got to be really fairly educated on it and get it done.
Well, yeah, certain equipment takes you 12 months just to get it. So you can't just buy a new machine and have it show up. So a lot of people don't really understand that some of these things take a huge lead time to get going. Ray and Ed, in your experience with small companies over the years, have you ever experienced anything similar to what may be happening here in, say, a few days?
I personally don't have any experience in anything like this.
Yeah.
My perspective is pretty much along the lines of John's, and it's going to be very disruptive to the businesses at first. And I think it will increase inflation, and everybody's concerned about inflation, correct? But by the same token, it could be an opportunity for U.S. companies to have an opportunity now to compete. That maybe in the past, maybe foreign countries have been dumping products into our country at a real low cost that they can't compete against. So
Yeah,
maybe it might open the door. And we've had some experience in the plastic industry, and we know that it's so competitive, and something like this could actually be a positive for that industry in the U.S., I think.
I would think so too. And in that case, that we both worked on with this company, I think it would have made a we were starting to see onshoring already two years ago or so. So, yeah, Ray, any additional comments?
Yeah, I think one of the thoughts that I had is we've already seen foreign countries, in particular, I'm looking at Colombia, who provides us with probably 80% of our coffee,
Mm,
and they've made it real clear that if Trump follows through on this, there's going to be a huge increase in the cost of coffee because they'll do a reciprocal tariff on coffee. So, I think the pressure there is going to be on the consumer. If the consumer suddenly sees a 10 to 15% increase in commodities that they're used to getting at X price and are now at Y price, I think it's going to be a significant impact.
yeah, I heard one of our illustrious Congress people in testimony the other day say, "Oh my gosh, you're going to cause our coffee to double, and that's just going to be horrible. It's going to be terrible for the consumer." And it's like, well, no, wait a minute. Okay, so a whole bunch of us have an increase in our coffee bill of 50 cents. Is that going to mean that we're going to sink the country because our coffee goes up? Trump is doing this for national security reasons and dumping reasons. He doesn't want inflation either. But some things are more important than other things. Like as much as I like coffee, I think I could afford to pay more for coffee. So it's sort of like, okay.
Well,
Well,
I think if I can add a little bit to that, I think it's not only coffee. I mean, we get so much of our produce from Central and Mexico, America and Mexico. So it's not just coffee. It'll impact a lot
That's
of
that's
people,
very true.
and it's going to be
Although
at
I
the
did
grocery store.
I did
You know,
hear that I can't remember who it was. Some small coffee growing company said, "Don't worry, we'll pick up the slack. Don't worry about it."
yeah,
yeah.
So, you've got all of this other dynamics going on too.
Well, it's going back to what John said. It's going to be disruptive.
yeah.
It's going to change things, but you're going to find new competitors coming into the market that's going to make up this difference.
Yeah.
And
Are you
because
saying
there's
then,
a
are these going to be American competitors, or is
well,
that what you think is
that's
going to
the
be the
that's
net
the point.
result? Is that
It
um,
could be from anywhere. That's what's great about our economy. We share in products from all over the place. So I guess we'll find out. But and the situation with Colombia could change overnight too. So like John said at the beginning, it's disruption, and we just really don't know which way it's going to go.
Yeah. So I guess our answer here is be fleet of foot and be prepared for a wide variety of changes in your business.
Yes.
So the
If it
long term, I think that the long term though is, and this was proven out in New Zealand, the long term is that those companies that were exceptionally well managed and they had a degree of flexibility in their ability to respond actually came out on top. And I use Fisher and Paykel as an example because what they basically did is they went from a rote manufacturing line of the same product all the time. They were already in the middle of doing a computerized unit one manufacturing system, meaning every single refrigerator or freezer that was coming off the line was actually QR coded or bar coded. It was set up for whatever color paint what it was and all of the information. So they were actually used to customizing their manufacturing. And when they got into it, they were now able to streamline and become more efficient in their manufacturing, to the point that they actually went out and won the contract with General Electric out of Indiana to refabricate their manufacturing line in the late 90s. They fought off Allen Bradley, Mitsubishi, Siemens. They became the provider of choice for that industry. And so they would have never done it if they hadn't been through this washing machine ringer where basically their business disappeared overnight.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
I mean,
let's shift our conversation over to tax policies. Trump is going to extend the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which allows pass-through pass-through entities to deduct up to 20% of their qualified business income. But he also proposes lowering corporate tax from 21 to 20 and further to 15% for companies manufacturing products in the U.S. Let's go to our tax expert, Ed. What does this mean for small business?
Well, I guess we really won't know until we see some definitions of exactly what's going to happen. But I think the bottom line here, the overall thrust of this thing is that producing in our country provides opportunities to our people, including employment opportunities. And I think investing and getting people to bring their businesses back to America because the taxes are more fairly levied against them makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Any other comments on that?
Well, I think it's obviously these changes, if they are put in permanently, are going to have a huge benefit for small businesses. You know, I mean, if you can reduce the tax burden, obviously there's more money that goes to the bottom line. And as John pointed out here, you know, there are a lot of companies in that situation in New Zealand who died and never recovered. So the consequence, you know, having a little more cash on hand is really helpful.
Yeah, and I think we'd probably all agree that this would be very, very helpful. And I guess my thought would be, boy, couldn't this have been timed a little better? Because if you could make a little bit more money, you'd have more cash for investment in order to stave off whatever happens with tariffs. You know, so I don't know, maybe they'll phase the tariffs in, but it feels like if you just impose it instantly, that's a problem, that the taxes won't help in 3 years or so.
Well, I'm hoping that the actual tariffs are more a bully pulpit than they are an actuality, and that maybe it would be, rather than being a generalized, we're going to tariff everything, to some very specific and targeted tariffs on particular products that would be, very beneficial. And then flip that around on the manufacturing side. What about bringing in some incentives, which is what is proposed, for actually gaining momentum in manufacturing and development of infrastructure in the US, so that the overseas product becomes less competitive, not just for its price, but for its quality and for its availability and its on-time shipping attributes.
Yeah. Well, I think we've all worked in manufacturing for clients or either in our own businesses, and so we have a lot of insight and experience on this particular issue. And I think what you say, John, is really right. Manufacturing has an opportunity with the right incentives to spend money on automation. And Ray, I know you've been involved in this for many, many years, but continual improvement, which includes better training of your people, as well as more and better manufacturing all the way through robotics, say, and AI now, could really make us a powerhouse. I remember economist Johan Mohan, who is a local economist, and he specializes in some manufacturing things. And he had said that he felt like automation was going to really make a difference, and we could just grab a whole lot of business from around the world. And he's a German. He's married to a Chinese he's a professor. He's married to a Chinese professor, both citizens. And so it was, but to the point to where he thought that we were going to automate so well and so fast that we would lose employment, and that this wouldn't really gain as much in employment as a lot of us would think it would. I don't know. And of course, it's a delicate balance. In my mind, it's like we don't have any choice. If we're going to be competitive with other countries to the point to where we could lift tariffs, we better automate, because who in the world is paying from $35 to $105 an hour to have some of these functions done? We're just completely outpaced, and by other countries, and very few other countries have labor costs like ours are, and therefore we're going to have to automate. And so it may actually cause a huge jump in automation and installation of better equipment in manufacturing.
Well, let me take another shot at that I think is relevant. We all saw that last week. The Chinese came up with DeepSeek, which is an AI product that they built for roughly 10% of the cost of the American version.
Yeah.
And people who have used it, I don't know if you've used it yet, Ron, but
No, I haven't
they say
tried
it's equal to anything that's in the United States. And
I don't want to encourage him,
yeah, but I think the point I'm trying to make here is that, yes, automation is going to be important for American manufacturing. I mean, it's an absolute necessity. But I say that in the context of the rest of the world doing the same thing. I mean, even when I was in Vietnam, I had a chance to go into a manufacturing company, and I was astounded at how much was being automated then, 5 years ago.
Right.
And so, the rest of the world understands that to compete, labor is a primary expense. If you can eliminate labor, then you can be more competitive.
Yeah.
So we've got some. We're in, I think, on the verge of some deep doo-doo.
Well, all of these changes might get us to the doo-doo a little bit faster than we would have otherwise, I suppose. So let's talk a little bit about the regulatory environment. I think that's kind of a gimme. It's like any deregulation for small businesses got to be helpful. Any disagreement with that?
Not for me, that's for sure. And it's the penalties of the regulations that really are devastating to small business, because they all want to do business the right way.
Yeah.
We deal with a lot of different businesses out there, and nobody says, well, we want to do something that's not according to the law. They all want to follow the law. They just don't realize what the law is sometimes.
That's a really good point, Ed. I mean, do any of us
if you don't follow it, you're going to get penalized and put you out of business. And we have seen that with the wage and hour issue.
Yeah.
At some of our customers that we deal with.
Yes. Yeah, it is. It's horrible. So yeah, the penalties, in an effort to use a big stick and trying to get everybody to do everything. But the truth of the matter is, oh gosh, what did I hear the other day? The regulations are, I don't know, hundreds of volumes of books worth of things that you have to do. And and we've reported on this for, say, California. There are just too many regulations for any small business to be able to comprehend. So, you have to move forward and make decisions. It just makes it awfully difficult to try and do business. How about immigration policies? What is this, Ray? What will stopping immigration and sending people out of the country do to our labor force?
Well, having spent most of my career working in manufacturing, I'm sure it would come as no surprise to any of you that the front line was comprised of immigrants. Most of them from Mexico. So I don't know exactly what's going to happen on that. I mean, I certainly didn't in the past, check these people to see if they were legal or illegal. But my feeling was that a lot of them were undocumented, and so it is going to have an impact. I don't know to what degree, but clearly there's going to be some challenges because some of these people, particularly in the lower income brackets, are by nature undocumented. So, I don't know how we're going to pick our fruit and things like that. So, how deeply that affects the economy, I'm not sure. But I think of a lot of our farmers as small businesses, and if they can't find anybody to pick their tomatoes, I mean, now in a week, they've just got a field of rotted vegetables.
Yeah, that's right. And so our prices go up if that happens.
Right.
So I think there's a little confusion in the looseness of these words. Ron, I think what you said is, what about stopping immigration and sending immigrants out? I'm an immigrant to this country.
And I should have said, and the article was really referring to illegal immigrants. So you're right.
Thank you. See, and this is how we get, focus shift on these things. So backing up, I'm an immigrant of this country, and I went through due process. And did I like it or not like it? Well, I didn't particularly like it, but it was the way that you became legally able to live here and pay taxes and work. So I think you need to break this down. First of all, removing illegal immigrants who have broken the law, two categories here. A, they're illegal. Two, they have broken the law. I think that's an entirely very valid thing to do, and there's not a problem with that, especially when we're talking about felons. We're not talking about speed stops. Perish the thought, I'd be probably deported. But well, you've got to, and it's not a laughing matter in some sense, but when somebody has, rape and stealing and malicious assault, hey guys, one-way ticket, gone. Yeah. That should not even be a debate. That shouldn't, there's no, when we're talking about humanity, yeah, we are talking about humanity. It's for the good of the order that these folks go back to where they can be parented differently. Yeah. Now, in terms of the individuals who come across the border specifically for cropping, I think there was, and there is, and there will be a methodology of bringing thousands of immigrants in on temporary visas and passes. And I think it's going to be an opportunity to perhaps clean that process up so that it is much more simplistic and much easier, but at the same time is in control. My advocacy would be those people who legitimately want to come across, give them an opportunity to apply, go through the process and do it. But when they're here, they better obey the laws and they better pay taxes.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if I can, I'm also an immigrant. So I understand, but my immigration was in 1951. Things were a lot different, and I came in with my father, and so I was an American citizen. When I walked or when we came across. I think the point that
your father was a citizen.
Yeah, and my mother became an citizen after she got here. So she went through the process, and in fact, I think my brother did too. My brother had to be naturalized.
I'm just now realizing, Ed, that 50% of our panelists are immigrants. So you see,
over the long term, we're all immigrants, right?
We certainly are. But,
I haven't seen an Indian in our group recently.
Yeah, we have a lot of diversity, even though we just look like a bunch of old white men.
Yeah. Well, that's true. But so the point that you're making, John, is that do you think that this immigration issue is overblown?
Well, it's sadly we've got into a lot of very loud yelling about what we're going to do. We're going to send everybody back. Well, I don't know that that's really the message. We need to be a little bit more refined. We're going to send the felons who are illegal immigrants back. For the benefit of, we're going to find a way of keeping immigrants who want to apply to the country. We're going to find a way to bring them in, and we need them to add to our workforce as we have for the last 200 years.
Right.
I mean, I think the message has got truncated and loud, and I think a little bit more refinement on that would be very much appreciated.
Yeah. Well, but with John, has Trump ever been known to do things in a nuanced way?
I'm not
No, he just said,
saying I
I'm
agree
gonna
or don't
I'm
agree. I'm
gonna
saying this
I'm
is
gonna
what
get
is
rid of
needed.
10 million people. You know,
There should be
was
a
the way
new
he
word.
put it.
Instead of truncated, it would be Trumpated. So
Trump-aided, right?
yeah.
But I've got to say, I feel really good when I see these gang
Yeah,
members.
yeah.
I
No,
mean,
I think
you
I didn't mean
cannot.
to interrupt you, but I do agree with you that getting rid of the criminals is an excellent idea. If they're
And why
doing
weren't
more,
we doing them before? I just want to know, why were we allowing criminals with these histories to? That is unconscionable as far
well,
as I'm
I
concerned.
agree with you, but that also
Okay, so
misses the point
we've got
that
one point we agree on here.
yeah, no, I don't disagree with you, but I am saying we were under the Biden administration, there were 250 people going out every day. You know, people they were looking to get rid of people who were in those categories. Now that's been accelerated, obviously, and you know, Trump has made a huge issue of it, but it's like it's not completely one-sided.
But when you have thousands coming in every day and only 250 leaving, that's our problem right there. So it's clear, it's really clear, I think, to almost anybody who cares about this issue, that you cannot bring in, say, up to 30 million people who unvetted and be able to deal with it. And we're seeing in Europe the same kind of thing. As a matter of fact, I saw in the news that Hungary has actually started shooting at people who are sneaking into their country. So you see, this has the potential to look pretty nasty. We simply have to control the borders, period. They've got to be controlled, or you're going to have chaos all over the world.
Well, and
One of
it's
the
true.
things that I
As
want
much
to mention is that we can handle our labor problems very easily. And it's really simple. And that is you allow people to have, work cards, work visas, whatever you want to call them, without being a citizen, so that they can go to work.
right.
And we have had one party that has been resisting that, both over voting rights, which they don't have any, and because it's supposedly just not right to request that, even though we have to have a license to do almost every other thing that we do. That is a major problem that has been caused. Now, when I was a kid, I grew up in Colorado, where migrant labor was absolutely essential to, in those days, harvest the sugar beets. It
Right.
required a huge amount of labor. You had to hand hoe the beets 3 times during the season. And then, they did develop some ways of pulling these big old sugar beets out,
Right.
automatically. But I mean, the hoeing was incredible. So they call it a bracero program, which was, we will pick you up at the border, we'll bring you to the farm, we'll give you a place to live, we'll make sure that you're fed, and you're going to go back home with money in your pocket. And we solved our problem that way. Somewhere in our political correctness movement since the 60s, the whole term bracero or bracero was considered to be racist.
Mm.
Like, well, I don't care what you call it. We should have a guest worker policy, and Congress has failed all of us by not allowing people to work in this country. That's the problem. And it's going to affect small business, as you've said. If small business people can't hire anyone, it's a problem. And
No, I think you're
yeah.
absolutely right. And truthfully, none of us white people are going to do that work. You know,
Well, I don't know. I hoed beets when I was a kid, I mean,
well, yes, when you were a kid, but you
well,
know,
actually,
imagine,
I was actually in college, but the Bracero program had ended, and they needed a huge amount of labor.
yeah,
And we got $20 an acre for hoeing beets. And I'll tell you, at the time, that was really good money. So it's like, this idea that we won't do the work. If you have an income from the government for not working, I agree. You may not want to work, but if you don't have an income, people will do extraordinary things to make the money they need to live. So there's a large percentage of our population that doesn't need to do dirty work. And we don't cherish it like we should.
yeah, it's funny. My father-in-law in Germany, or Justin's father-in-law, raises beets, sugar beets.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, and among other crops. I mean, he rotates, and a couple years ago he did sugar beets. I'm not sure what he's doing this year. But the point is that I don't recall how he gets help on taking care of them. But as you probably know, if you go into any manufacturing in Germany, what you're going to run into is Turkish people.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
a lot of their labor, instead of coming from Mexico, comes from Turkey.
Mhm.
And so, they've solved most of their labor problem by immigrants, just as we have here, for those jobs that they can't get done.
Are they staying, or do they have a guest worker program for that?
I frankly, I don't know how it works exactly, Ron. I just know that there are a lot of Turkish people. We, as a point of reference, Justin and I, or Justin took us to a pizza shop, and it was run by Turkish people. And the menu was both in Turkish and in German. Good pizza.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised, and he said that, that a lot of them run little restaurants, and they're small businessmen, just like
Yeah.
a lot of Mexicans are.
I was in Turkey last year, as you guys will recall, but in Turkey, we ran into several people who had said, "Oh yeah, I was in the United States and I was trying to set up a business, et cetera, but I couldn't. It was too costly, too much regulation. I couldn't really figure out the bureaucracy." And then others who, one guy in a little rug shop, and just a brilliant guy, spoke terrific English, and was up on the economy and what was going on in Turkey, what was going on around the world and in the United States, and he just knew a whole bunch of stuff. And I said, and this is a little bit on the side, and then I said, well, how in the world did you learn all of this? Because he had said something about his education. He did not go to college.
Right.
And he said he held up his phone and he said, right here,
Yeah.
this is what taught me English. This is what taught me about the economy. This is what taught me whatever I needed to
Right.
know. And if I could only get into the United States legally, I would go in a second, but it's so difficult to do.
Right.
So there are good people all around the world who would make wonderful immigrants. So I'll make the argument, Ray, yeah, we need immigrants, but why don't we choose the ones that we want as opposed to allowing floods of them to come through the border, you see? Now, I think we all agree that was a really, really bad period in our history. But now that we have the problem, do we really want to have anybody who managed to break the law get to stay? This is a hard question. Personally, I could pick 3 or 4 people that we met in Turkey that I'd rather have here instead of somebody who, broke through our gates and came in illegally.
Well, I think John's got a point, I mean, and it's very clear if they came in illegally, they're criminals. It's, there's not, it's not, it's
There are
black
people
and
who
white,
disagree with
and
that,
so they have to be prepared to be deported.
Yeah, some
and I
people
think
think that's just terrible, and it's just creating so much stress for these people.
It's a problem that is not easy to pinpoint because
It's
there
tough.
has
It's
been
all tough.
well, there's been historic methods of allowing people in. If you go back and count the number of presidents who have sat on the fence on immigration and allowed illegal immigrants to be living here and not doing anything about it because they were going to push it out of the way. And the reason they push it out of the way is it offends a lot of people. And it offends a lot of people because I've got friends. I've got a friend of mine who was not a legal immigrant. He had worked here for 20 years. He had a wife that he married here. He had 3 kids that he had here. And here he is. And about 10 years ago, I said, I will sponsor you as a immigrant. You need to do this. And I can sponsor you for it, or you can get other people, but you need to do it because at some point, push comes to shove. Now, the government in charge at that time was not the current government. The government in charge was not the past government by Biden. The problem was that the government, and I'm going to say it doesn't matter whether it was Democrat or Republican, just didn't want to deal with it. And I'm going to say you got to deal with these hard things. And if you make it easy for people to slide in under the cover and they never really get caught up and it's no big deal, well, guess what you're going to get? You're going to get a whole bunch of people doing just that. And can you blame them? No.
No.
And now they've got kids and they got families and they got relationships. I'm sorry, we created this mess.
Right.
And so I think we need to now uncreate it. But I agree with Ron. We need some very strict boundaries from now on, but we need to clean up. I would say anybody who's been here for X number of years and got kids, if they haven't been a felon, give them citizenship. Get them on the books. Let's clean it up.
I totally agree with that. It's got to be a path to be a citizen of this country.
Yeah.
That's accepted. It makes sense. And I want to bring up one other question, and maybe this is a good question to end on, and that is California has taken the position to hide criminals from the federal government.
Oh, that's not good.
Yeah.
To me, I cannot in any justification understand why someone would do that. I open that up for conversation.
Well, I just could say I absolutely agree with you. I can't even begin to comprehend why people would, it's officials, elected officials would think that our population is for, letting criminals off. And we're starting to see the backlash a little bit. And voters need to stand up and say, it's time to have some law and order people back in office again. That's probably the only solution, but I mean, it's just crazy. And that's a subject that affects small business in a huge way. Look how many small business people in retail have been forced out of business because of theft. And you can go into all of the cities that are in that category, Los Angeles and Portland, Seattle, San Francisco in particular. They've got storefronts that are open because the people who used to be there were driven out of business by homeless people and by theft. That's a major problem. You can't even have a society like that. So that needs to stop.
Well, Ron, you're wrong. We can have a society that's like that, and we have allowed it, and we do have societies like that. And a lot of people have chosen not to live there because of it.
No, well, you can't have a society where all the stores close. Oh, I guess you could say we'll all go to Amazon. I guess you could say that, but who wants to go to our own downtown here and have half or three-quarters of the stores closed?
Yeah.
Have crime go up. That's not a civilized society anymore, and that has got to change.
Now, maybe you guys can help me out a little bit. Ed, do you know, saying what you did about criminals, are they talking about people who have illegally come over here, or are they talking about illegals who have come over that were defined as criminals? I'm not sure which is which.
These are people that have broken the law. They're on the radar of our system as being problems. And our government in California has decided not to work with the feds on trying to deport criminals.
Right.
I mean, that's very simple. And I want to bring up an example. Carbon monoxide detectors are really important in homes. And a lot of people recently, or some people have died because their carbon monoxide units failed. So we went over to Home Depot and tried to buy one recently. And guess what? There was not one on the shelf. And the store manager says it's under review because we can't keep people from walking in and walking out with them.
Yeah.
So we're a citizen. We want a carbon monoxide unit in our house to protect our family. We couldn't buy one at Home Depot because they're all being stolen, and management there decides they need to review the policy before they buy any more. That seems crazy, guys.
Yeah, it's funny. Yesterday I went, into Vaughn's, and I hadn't realized how much product is under lock and key today.
Oh, that's a good point, Ray.
Yeah. You
So
can't
And
get
there's
soap,
nobody
you
in
can't
the
get
store that
anything
can
without.
open them up.
we've become a third world country in this. And I spent some time in Nicaragua about 5 years ago, and a couple of weeks, and I was doing some building projects. So I went to their Home Depot. You drive into the Home Depot, and there are two people at the doors with black uniforms on and AK-47s standing there.
Yeah.
But you know what? You can go up and buy anything you want, and you can walk out with it.
And you can probably,
I am thinking that's not a
shoot
bad way to
them.
do it. And perhaps that's where we're going to end up, because right now I go into the Home Depot, I want to buy an electric breaker, a $25 breaker, and it's locked up. I've got to call somebody. They're going to come over. Then they will not give it to me. They don't trust me with a $20 breaker. So they have to take it over to the counter for me to buy it from.
Oh my
This
God.
is ridiculous. But I can walk out with one of the refrigerators or a microwave, and then I've got to stop me.
Right.
Can you think of this? This
Well,
is
we've come a long
this is
way.
absurdity.
We've come a long way. I can remember in my lifetime when it was not too uncommon where people who were say in the middle of a riot, that those who were looting were shot. In my lifetime, those were
With rubber bullets or
that
with water
existed.
bullets, and occasionally with real bullets.
Okay, that's right. Especially in the South, they like to shoot them down there. And so now that's just a funny comment. So, but anyway,
No, that's not a funny
That's
comment.
not funny.
That's not funny, Ron.
I
Well,
think,
but it was true. But it's true. But yeah. So I mean, things have really shifted. We were too far on one side, and now we're way too far on the other side. Let's bring it back to the middle.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it was one of the things I was thinking of recently. I really needed some help on my backyard here. And, 10 years ago, I just go down to Home Depot and pick up three people that were standing outside looking for work and come home and get my work done. And that was the end of it, Well, we don't see that anymore, so it means that I have to be more, I have to go through formal channels, which is, probably the way it should be.
I don't know. I mean, I think that that ties into, in terms of employment, that ties into the whole area of people wanting to work and feeling gratified for doing even, manual work. I mean, I made enough money doing sidewalks and lawns and cleanup projects from 14 or so on to put myself through college for 2 years. It's like, are you afraid to work? Yeah, nobody wants to work. Okay, well then, stop giving them money. We're not going to get people to do that. And so we have we've talked about this before. We have teenagers and above who are going to work after college for the first time, having never had employment at all. This is not helping our workforce because these folks need years to figure out the right things to do, like show up on time.
Well, I think it's honorable and worthwhile to work. I think we all have stories when we're growing up that we worked with our hands. I worked baling hay on farms. I worked driving trucks when I was 12 on a farm without a driver's license.
Yeah.
It was fun.
I milked cows on a herringbone cow shed when I was 7 and 8 in exchange for food. Staying with my aunt and uncle. I mean, you just worked.
Yeah. Right.
And funnily enough, some of the work was actually kind of enjoyable. And some of it wasn't. But I mean, some of it it's like, I actually don't mind doing this. It's kind of fun.
Right. I had a job one time. I don't mean to go too far off here, the subject, but I had a job one time where I had to stand, and occasionally, maybe every 30 minutes, we use a hose with my thumb, and I would squirt peas out of a barrel. This was in a canning company. I'd just squirt. And the interesting thing about that is that that's the one job I only lasted one day. It was a 12-hour day. I lasted one day.
Boring.
I could work physically all day long, because it was like I'm active, I'm doing something. But when my mind was completely stagnant, I had to leave. I could not stand it. So yeah, work is good for you. You feel better about real work. And so, okay, we have one more subject to touch on in our last few minutes, and that's inflation and interest rates. So right now we're approximately 2.5% to 3.1%. They're trying to get it down to 2%. the inflation, of course, we've talked about before. It's a problem, but it's not anything close to what it was. And businesses can learn to deal with this kind of inflation. But what does it do to interest rates? How does that affect small business?
Well, obviously, you know, the more you have to pay for the use of money, the less that you have in your pocket. So interest rates have a huge impact on them. You know, I mean, we can all think back to the 80s when, you know, I bought my first home here in California. And between the time I put the down payment and the time I closed, rates went from 11 to 13%.
Yeah, well, yeah, you
And
should have.
that was absolutely nuts. You know,
Well, and what about carrying interest, Ed? When you've got to buy three or $4 million machines, and your interest rate used to be 4.5, and now it's 6.5, 7%. What does that do to the bottom line?
Well, it basically, it changes people's position on investments. They don't want to spend the money. And because they have to borrow it, and they have to go through a bunch of processes there to get approved. So to me, it inhibits the investment in companies. And we just got done talking about how important it was to implement automation into companies so we're more attractive and earn more money and are more able to get things done
Yeah.
quicker with fewer people. So yeah, it does have an impact. And what's really interesting, they talked about cutting the rates. They've cut the rates, but the rates for borrowing have gone up. That's really an interesting situation.
Yeah, it is. I don't understand that quite at this point.
So
but isn't the Fed supposed to cut rates this week, or at least, have they cut it, or are they keeping it the same?
No, yesterday they chose to leave it the same and to not comment about what they're going to be doing. They're trying very, very hard to stop commenting because a lot of economists have kind of come down on the other side saying that these guys don't really understand what they're doing and have made a lot of mistakes. Yeah, it's too early to say, I think, whether or not it was the right thing to do or not, or if we've been on the right path. I just think that, as Ed said, if you happen to see a capital intensive business is a little different. We're now in a world where we have labor intensive. If you're in software or doing high tech stuff, unless you're manufacturing high tech stuff. I mean, if you're doing design work, mental work, computer work, you don't have these huge investments. But if we want to be in manufacturing, you've got huge, huge investments in front of you, and interest rates matter a lot.
So then my take on this, Ron, to add into what you're saying, as we talk about this, it's, of course, the simple answer is it's all about the money, which is we all know, but it's about return on investment. And then return on investment for me is, Ed's the expert in this, but return on investment isn't a comment that most people understand. Return on investment is a return on investment over time. So now we say, okay, how much time are we going to have this return on investment evaluation done? I typically use 10 years. Well, okay, so let's use a return on investment for 2 new $3 million pieces of equipment over 10 years. When you have a government that is going to change the tariffs on 3 things up to 30 or 40% in the next 6 months, what do you say about that decision? You say, you know what? Let's wait and hold.
Yeah.
Wait and see.
Wait and see. And so what you're talking about a 10-year investment, and you're talking about the conditions that apply to that return. And actually, it turns out the interest rate is the least of these when you've got a tariff possibility of going on. You may quite happily buy at a high rate of interest on something when you know the tariff is going to assist you in making that piece of equipment profitable.
Right.
I bought a house several years ago at 9.5%, because that's back in 1979, 80. And that was what the rates were. And I happily went in and bought a house at 8 or 9%. Why? Because I knew it wasn't going to last. I was going to refinance it. And the value of the house was depressed and I would pay for a year this interest rate, and in 2 years I'd refinance and I'd be sitting on top. It didn't worry me that it was 9% for a year because I was only going to pay that for a year. I mean, when you did the math, it really did not matter. Ed, I'm flipping it back to you because this is how you make a
You're
living.
bringing up a very good point, especially related to real estate, because right now, in my opinion, is a great time to buy real estate. And you're right, you may have to have a higher interest rate, but you can always refinance down the road.
Right.
These people, a lot of people are on the sidelines waiting for the rates to drop before they buy. By the time they drop, the real estate prices are going to go up significantly more.
Yeah.
So
So
I'm gonna,
that's an excellent point, John.
I'm gonna throw a curveball in here for you guys to evaluate, and that is that our rates today are not high; they're normal.
Yeah.
And so when we take a look at where our rates were going into the the recession, great inflation of the 70s, which I lived through as a businessman, I was getting interest of about 6% on a CD, increments of $10,000 or $20,000, and you'd put it in the bank and you'd have to leave it in there for a year or 2 years. But I was pretty pleased to be able to get in 6%, 6.5%. That's as a consumer, and it went crazy after that as we got into the 70s. Only 3, 4, 5 years later, I mean, this interest rate went way up for those who were borrowing money, but it also went up for those who had money, who were saving money. Let's not forget about that side. Everybody has been complaining about interest rates, but man, I'm getting CD rates of about 4.1, 4.2% right now. Now, you might say that's nothing compared to the stock market, but it depends on, are you an investor or a saver? What side of the equation are you on? Small business people are mostly investing, unless they are, say, in Ed's sphere where they're trying to sell their business and figure out how to get that done. But for the most part, you're pushing forward, you're borrowing, you're growing, you're hiring people, you're trying to build your business. For the most part, businesses are consumers of money. They're not investors of money until they're done with business. So it really hurts small business people. But for those of us who, might be done and or retired or just have enough money, to be investing, it's not so bad on that other side of things. So it's interesting that it's always pro and con,
Yeah.
depending on
But
where you happen to be.
But I think this issue of inflation is obviously, I think it's going to go up. So, the tariffs, et cetera, how much is acceptable to the American public? We'll find out in 2 years for the next election. In the meantime, we just have to live with whatever it is.
So who agrees with Ray that inflation is going to start edging back up?
Not everybody at once, please.
Well, I'll say that no, I agree with you. I think that we're going to see pressures on increased inflation, maybe not right away on the consumer level, but on the wholesale level and on the import thing. If we get, say, half as way to where Trump is threatened, that's going to cause some pressure on inflation, and that's going to be an interesting discussion between Trump and Fed at that point when inflation goes back up to 4.5.
I think
Ray
the
brought
big,
up a very good point, and that is it's going to impact whether people get reelected. That's why I don't think it's going to go up anywhere near we think it's going to go up, because people want to get reelected. And inflation is a dagger in your resume.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
I think kind of with Ed on this one, and I think the big unknown is what's going to happen in the energy sector. I think the largest single movement that we've got in terms of cost of operation in the country is energy. And I think manufacturing cannot grow unless they have a low cost, stable, unable to be leveraged source of energy. So I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, if we deal with our gas resources and our gasoline resources and our oil resources appropriately, and we come along with a combined integration of the newer energies, solar and batteries, I think we'll have a really wonderful time. And I think manufacturing will come back, jobs will be produced. I think inflation will be contained. If we fail to deal with energy appropriately, and I mean, we don't want to banish electric cars. No, absolutely not. We need them, but we also need to have clean diesel and clean ICE engines. I mean, I think we can do them both.
Well, you can't forget about nuclear either.
Yeah.
Nuclear
I almost
reactors
gave
are
that as a
clean
foregoing
energy.
that we're going to have it.
I think we have to.
You know, I'm with you, Ed.
Yeah.
It's
And I
the
think
cleanest
that's
energy we've got.
that is one of the things that I think Trump has really got his finger on, and I happen to agree with him, and that is that energy is the key here. And when he says drill, baby, drill, he also means energy everywhere, and let's make it cheap, because that does drive industry. Think about the cost of steel in our country. Its prices are driven up by energy. That's what makes it expensive. And you can go on and on and on. Our trucking, anything that requires a lot of energy. And those who haven't dealt commercially with how much energy costs are, a very, very small company in, say, plastics or almost any kind of manufacturing, that might have 50 or 100 employees, their energy bills are 40, 50, $60,000 a month. So for those of you out there who are unfamiliar with energy and manufacturing, you need to understand this is a very, very material number.
Right.
That is causing inflation. Not all of it, but it's causing a lot of the inflation. So I'll have to say, I think Trump is right on the money on this one.
I think the other thing, I think you guys have all heard that, part of the challenge for energy is going to be all the data centers that are now coming up for AI that are consuming an enormous amount of energy, and it's going to require that we expand energy a lot. So, yeah, it's going to be some interesting things going forward.
Sometimes, yeah. Well, I don't know if we can summarize all of this stuff. Maybe we won't even have to try. So for those of you who are still with us, you listened to all of the stuff before. We'll let you summarize. I guess the one thing that we can say is stay fleet of foot. Keep your eye on this stuff. And I guess maybe we sorted out that watch the tariffs, because the tariffs will have a domino effect to each of these other subjects that we've talked about. So,
yes.
Hey, great. Thank you. Great conversation yet again. And we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you, Ron.